Step into the ring of the unconscious. Confront yourself and win. This is Shadowboxing, a show about personal battles within.
All right.
This one is definitely going to get into the society thing though a little bit, which we always have. And I know you said you wanted to stray from it, but it's inevitable.
Yeah,
But this
it
specific
is.
quote reminds me of a certain behavior of people
Yeah,
that it's always grated on me.
I kind of figured when I read it, but as long as we always bring it back. Um,
Jesus.
all right. Nick, how are you?
I'm good. I'm peachy. Got my
Absolutely.
oysters in me. Got my tacos in me. How are you, Tyler?
Tacos and oysters. I'm good. I haven't eaten yet, but I'm saving it as a treat for when we're done. Um,
I'm saving the nourishment I require to live as just a little treat. I like living.
just a little treat. Okay, so yeah, let's just dive into your quote because it's a long one, so I might as well read it all right now. Long words go rattling by us like long railway trains. We know they are carrying thousands who are too tired or too indolent to walk and think for themselves. It is a good exercise to try once in a way to express any opinion one holds in words of one syllable. If you say, the social utility of indeterminate sentence is recognized by all criminologists as part of our sociological evolution towards a more humane and scientific view of punishment. You can go on talking like that for hours with hardly a movement of the gray matter inside your skull. But if you begin, I wish Jones to go to jail and Brown to stay, or say, when Jones shall come out, you will discover with a thrill of horror that you are obliged to think. By G.K. Chesterton. Whew. Yes, a long one.
Which is kind of ironic given the substance of the quote, but
It is. But I think it's a good one because it definitely made me think.
you're right, which was his whole point.
Yeah, yeah.
No, but I really like that quote because I have noticed a sort of trend of people this is the way I always phrase it in my head because it's meant to be ironic of people using quote what amounts to only a moderately broad lexicon but in their minds a grandiose one, constructing these inordinately verbose polysyllabic diatribes in the hopes that they intimidate their opponent into thinking that they're intelligent. And again, that's intended to be ironic.
It works. I
Yeah,
was just
exactly.
gonna say. So you mean people who over-explain too much? Is that?
And exactly, I was about to be like, now here that is in a way that the guy was trying to describe a very simplified way. I don't know, I would really have to think to be like, okay, one syllable words because I am prone to using polysyllabic words myself, but for me, it's a function of trying to pick a word that has the exact connotation that I want it to have. It's not a function of trying to sound smart. It's like, okay, I have all these options. I want to pick the word that means exactly what I want it to mean and implies exactly what I want it to imply.
Right. Well, I mean,
so anybody who claims that I'm saying something I'm not, I can be like, no, I very deliberately chose what I mean. But I really have noticed people who are trying to sound complex because they think it lends validity to what they're trying to say, or will just intimidate the other person into silence by being, oh, this person is obviously so smart. But a lot of times they seem not to know what they're even actually saying. They're just kind of repeating something that they've heard.
Right. Well, I mean, it seems like an appeal to authority in a society where intelligence um, is seen as higher on the social hierarchy, which, there's an argument to say that it is, but it's interesting if you think that like 500 years ago it didn't matter how smart you could talk. It mattered like if you were the bigger guy in the room having the discussion. Um, and then our society gave way to reason and debate and things like that. But that does seem to be what it is, right? It's like an appeal to authority. It's like, well, I have a more well-spoken and clearly more well thought out understanding of this topic. So by de facto, you should listen to me over someone else.
Yeah, well, and with so much of the conversation now not occurring in person, and thus where like your musculature doesn't really matter. That is the flex, I guess. Instead of like, didn't they say that about Plato? That there was like times where he would literally just stand up and flex his muscles to win a debate. Like that it doesn't matter now at this point, since so much of the conversation is happening online. It's the way you do that is by being like, oh, well, I know a word that's 6 syllables long, which beats your 4.
Well, you know what's interesting too, and I don't know how true this is. I heard it secondhand a long time ago, but I think it's probably fairly accurate. Um, Back maybe 100 years ago in U.S. politics, if you look at the debates between people, it really between candidates, it really was more important to sound smarter to the voter.
Mm-hmm.
Voters wanted someone who sounded intelligent, and then that changed over the years. And then 20 years ago, you get George Bush, right? And people didn't want their leader to sound more intelligent; they wanted their leader to sound more like them. That's why George Bush was a good candidate. In the early 2000s was because like he just sounded like a down home, simple country boy who loved America, and people ate that shit up. Um, and I would not be surprised over the next 20 years it shifts back, and you start to see candidates that try and sound more intelligent on the campaign trail because that's more important to the voter. Um, but you know, to digress from like politics and stuff, um, I just thought that was an interesting point. It
Well,
is
no, that does seem to be where it manifests most of the time, and there's a great irony to me that the people who seem most prone to doing that, to being overly verbose, and constructing these giant, like the wall of text meme, that whole thing.
Mhm.
To me, that just screams that person is actually insecure about their own intelligence.
Right. That's
That
actually
that
where
they
I wanted to
feel
go.
the need to do that.
Right. It to me it seems like an inferiority complex, right?
Yeah.
Like there's this desire to be seen as intelligent because you need your intelligence validated. Um, and it's easy to do when you're talking about opinions, right? Because like you're not actually citing any research, or you're not explaining um, how something can be backed by science. You're talking about trying to use charisma to sway someone into believing your side. And sometimes that does use facts, right? And statistics and things like that. But for the most part, it really has to do with I want to convince this person that I am the more credible source on this. And so I'm just going to sound more illiterate, um, and try and belittle them. And I don't know, I guess I had a habit of over explaining for a long time, and I still catch myself doing it with certain people. And I realize that um, that stems from two places depending on the nature of the argument, right? Like if it's a constructive argument, I'm over explaining because I want to make sure that the person I'm talking to fully understands where I'm coming from.
Yes, which I think is perfectly legitimate. I'm prone to that too.
Yeah, and it can be annoying. Like and it's nice when someone goes, no, 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 I understand that, like, and then they can like say something that confirms that they understand it. But
Yes, exactly.
but but when it comes to an argument, really like it really came down to not so much I want this person to think I'm smart, but it's almost like a self-confirmation. I want to prove I'm smart to myself because I have steel-manned my argument to the point that like I can explain it in this very intelligent sounding way, and it confirms my bias towards what I believe. Like if you're coming at me with a very simplistic verbiage, like that just tells me that it's like, okay, you haven't really thought this through. But as you get older, at least in my experience, like that's certainly not the case, right? Like
No,
I
it's
actually,
not. And again, I've never thought that way. Honestly, one of the things that I believe is that a mark of authenticity is an ability to convey your point in a unique way that doesn't rely on a bunch of complex tropes to sound intelligent, but in a unique way and in multiple ways. If the only way you can convey a point is essentially by repeating this same rote, like, jargon, I don't believe you're being authentic.
yeah. Well, I mean, for me, at least, I think where it kind of stemmed from was having grown up in a rural community on a farm, with people that weren't very well spoken. Um, I even like distinctly remember my dad getting aggravated with me when I'd use words he didn't understand, right? Words I learned in school or from media.
Mm.
And that upset him. Um, and I remember one time my dad got interviewed by a local paper, and they basically wrote his words kind of like Mark Twain would write. You know what I mean? Like they tried. What is the name of that type of writing where he tries to write in the accent you're speaking, so the reader can kind of pick up on like, oh, this is the dialect being used. There's a word for
Like
it.
colloquially or something?
That might be it. Yeah, that sounds right. But like it made him sound like a rube. And
Oh, jeez.
yeah. And so that's the thing, and what's funny is like my dad's actually pretty smart. Like he can do math in his head. Like that impresses me. Like you can just rattle off numbers to him and he'll just like tell you what it is. So he's a pretty smart guy, but like at least in that community there was this old school mentality of like people who use big words shouldn't be trusted. Um, and I think that was definitely a rural culture in earlier America because like
No, see, but I kind of get that. That relates to the whole reason I picked the quote. And again, like, I am a person who uses big words, but having listened to people, like, I can tell the difference between somebody who uses big words because that's the way they talk and somebody who uses big words because they're trying to make you think that they know more than they do. To me, it's just so obvious.
hmm
So I get why people who are like, no, we can convey our points very simplistically and we're authentic about it would be like, okay, somebody who shows up and is like, I mean, that's how like they portray con men in movies all the time. The snake oil salesman is always this guy who's just got this massive lexicon. You know what I mean?
right.
They never convey a snake oil salesman as an idiot.
No.
A linguistic idiot, I should say.
Right. Yeah, right. He's always a smooth, fast talking, guy who like bombards you with different terminology and tries to confuse you into buying this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
No,
like,
I
oh
get it.
God, he's clearly educated because, and that's it. That's what it comes down to. People associate general intelligence with, having a large selection of words to choose from, which it's not like those things aren't correlated at all. But just because someone has memorized a bunch of phrases with a lot of syllables doesn't inherently mean that they're smart. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't understand.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, yeah. I I think what you're kind of tapping into is like specifically in the context of um, inauthentic, deceptive people, right? But like one thing I also noticed in this quote that I think, you know, is worth pointing out is this concept that like when someone talks to you or when you're talking or when someone's talking to you and they use more simplistic verbiage, like what you end up getting is you have to think about in what context and to what degree is this person talking about. So it kind of forces you into being a little bit more active in understanding what they're trying to say, right? um like it, like if you're trying to persuade someone of something, like it can definitely benefit you if you're making statements that cause them to ask questions, right? Because now you've actively made them act to ponder what it is that you're trying to get across, and while they're doing that, they are attempting to reason with it in their minds. Versus, I'm going to lay all my cards out on the table and over explain this subject and attempt to sound smart in the process. Versus, you say something and someone goes, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And then it allows you to elaborate further, right?
There's the point, yeah, because what I think the quote is actually about is not so much making the listener question. To me, what the quote implied was that, like, you having to use simpler language makes you have to engage your brain matter before, because that exactly what you said about somebody questioning you. Well, they can question you either way, whether you're using complex language or simple language. But again, I have noticed people that are clearly trying to use complex language to demonstrate that, like, their point that they're correct in their views doesn't come from the words that the point of the words that they choose. They're trying to prove they're correct just from the complexity of the words. And so the moment you do ask people like that, well, what do you mean by, intersectionality is the root that's going to generate the blah, 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 blah. The moment you say, well, what does that mean? They become extremely frustrated, deflect, and a lot of times insulting because they never have thought about it.
Mm-hmm.
They just picked up these words and started repeating them like, oh, God, the person who said these words to me clearly knows what they're talking about and agrees with me. Thus, if I repeat those words, that must mean I'm correct. And there is no engagement of the gray matter. Like that is the entirety of the thought is person I agree with says words sound smart, I repeat words, I will be right, and nobody will ever ask me what I mean because I seem smarter than them. But if they had to break it down simply, if they are asked, well, what does that mean? Can you explain that in a more, like, unique, simpler way? The immediate response of frustration makes it so clear that they've never even thought about what they're saying actually means.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose that's I'm trying to wrap my head around this.
The reason I'm so sure about that is because I've experimented with it so many times. There have been, God, 50, maybe even 100 plus interactions I've had now where somebody that I believe is doing that very thing, trying to sound more informed than they really are. I've said, say the same thing in a way that is unique and not using all of these tropes that I've heard before that are extremely complex and abstract. Just say the same thing in your own way. And to date, none of them ever has. Not a single one of them. They've gotten frustrated and insulting every time. And the only conclusion I can arrive at from that is that they don't actually know what they're saying. They've never thought about it.
Yeah, but like, did you say earlier that like you're not familiar with that on a personal level? Or like, do you have a story where you feel that you did that to someone else? Or is that like just could you expand on it from like instead of talking about it from another person, like in your life, have you ever done that? Like, and it doesn't not necessarily in a dishonest way, like the way you're characterizing it, but just like,
No, I've never felt the need to, because I don't express an opinion that I haven't deeply considered before I express it. Like
okay,
that, I would find that honestly like immoral to a degree. That's just the way I think. I'm not saying it is, but I,
well,
I
yeah,
don't.
I get what
Yeah.
you're. Yeah, well, the reason I ask is because like you do frame it in a very like this person is being deceptive, right? But and I can say confidently that I have been that person before, um, and in the instances that I felt like I did it, it came from a place of insecurity more so than anything else. Like I and I don't think that like what I was doing in those instances is the same thing as the people that you're talking about that you've interacted with, because if someone asked me to like reduce down what I'm saying into a similar or a simpler statement, I could, right? Um but there was like a sense of almost like this reaffirms what I believe because it is itself is an intelligent idea, right? Like,
Yeah, and that's what I mean by like they heard this phrase from someone they agree with,
mhm.
and in that agreement, that obviously implies that it's something they believe or at least want to believe. But the delivery itself is what I'm talking about. The delivery itself is not authentic, if that makes any sense. Not the belief behind it, just the delivery itself. Like they don't know what they're saying. They
Mhm.
just know that a person that shares the same view that they have said it this way, and so they're going to say it that way too.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is, but there's also people out there who are intelligent who use their intelligence to dominate other people, and they may know what they're saying, and they may not just be using beep boops, but like,
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, like I mean, I think we have a mutual friend who does that.
yeah,
It's like
um,
who is being unnecessarily complex and verbose. But again, I think the unifying factor of both of those things is a degree of insecurity about their intelligence.
right. Well, and that's kind of my point at the end of the day is like I think there are a lot of people out there that do it, like the pseudo intellectual trope, you know, the person who's trying to sound smarter than they are for the sake of sounding smarter because it validates their personal image of themselves, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah,
like and
and that
that yeah,
definitely a possibility.
yeah, and I think I mean like I'm more interested in that because like the the person who is just saying the phrases that they've heard to assert an opinion of theirs, like those aren't people that I typically try to initiate any sort of prolonged conversation with anyway, right? Like when I meet those people, I typically just walk away because I'm like, okay, well, like I'm just going to be talking to a wall if I talk to you about anything.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely no. Like, and in real life, I would do the same thing. Like the specific instances I'm talking about are like while I'm at work, and I'm on social media because that's how I kill time when I'm at work, and I need my focus diverted from work,
Right. No, but that's the
and
thing.
while still doing my job, but like I'm just killing time.
I try and think about it on terms of like off social media because social media changes dynamics of human interaction so much that it's just not natural, right? Like cuz you've met those people in real life too, I'm sure. Like we all have. And it's like,
But I actually haven't. Like those kinds of people in real life, if I just like speak to them at all, they'll typically be the ones to walk away because there's I guess kind of the immediacy of consequences there. Not saying like I'm gonna hit them or anything like that, but like they don't feel so protected behind the wall, so they don't even try that. It becomes very apparent that like I have just as broad of a lexicon, and not only that, but I can explain what I'm talking about. And so they'll, in real life, their response is just to be like, well, I don't want to talk about this anymore because they can't.
Right. Okay. Let me put it this way. Right. And I get what you're saying, but like, um, I mean, I know two people who, if they believe they're right, they will never yield their position and they will just continue to discuss it with you like forever. Like it won't end, right? And for a long time I would like get into these discussions and find myself engaged in this hours long debate over some theory or some opinion on some position, whatever. And um I had the opportunity to pit these two against each other at one point, and it was so funny to watch because neither one was willing to yield, and it went on for like 45 minutes over something super trivial. And meanwhile, I'm just laughing while I'm watching them, and then finally one of them yields, and I like went to him later and I was like, "Hey, just so you know, I'm really proud of you because like I I brought that topic up to see if who would quit first because I knew both of your personalities were like that. I'm glad that you're the bigger man in that situation." Um, but it's funny because like after a while, I realized it's like these people that do that, it's so obnoxious that eventually you don't want to engage. And like, say I'm at a party and I start talking to someone and you find out immediately they're very opinionated and they want to like overtly share their opinion in the most intelligent way. Like what ends up happening is you either disengage or you get taken hostage and you do the polite thing, which sometimes can be amusing, but you just continue to ask them questions and let them basically talk because that's clearly what they want to do is they don't want to have a discussion. They just want to be heard. And so you just listen to them.
Oh God, that's so funny that you put it that way.
Well, and that's what I'm
because like, okay, so I actually went to a party once a couple years right before COVID, and it was this commie guy actually. We spent like 3 hours going back and forth, and everybody had done like a little bit of acid, and like the other members of the party were actually just like listening to us go back and forth. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while someone would try and chime in and they would just get fucking bulldozed by us continuing to talk to each other. Mm-hmm. And like what you just said too reminds me, like I've been accused many times in my life of like, oh, you just want to be right, which is not at all the case. It really isn't. And people that I say that to don't believe me. And honestly, I believe that's a projection on their part. I'm like, I think you do, but because I can counter things so well or ask questions that you can't answer, you just accuse me of what you actually want. And the funny thing is, I'm like, no, I don't want to be right. I am already convinced I'm right, and I do not need to hear that from you. I want you to know that you're wrong, which isn't necessarily any better. But like that's why I'm like, no, that's not my thing. That's your thing. I want you to know that you're wrong.
Right.
But nobody has ever been like, you just want me to know that I'm wrong. And I just think that that's funny. It's kind of a semantic thing, but it's hysterical to me.
Well, I also think that people that engage in that, like deep down, they enjoy it. Right? Like if you were not enjoying yourself,
God,
why
I
would
enjoy
you continue?
It. Yes, sir.
Yeah, why would you continue to engage with someone for that long if you didn't enjoy it? And I think that plays a big part. You know.
But, well, and part of the reason I enjoy it too, and this is less like petty, I guess, like wanting somebody to know they're wrong. That's certainly petty. I acknowledge that. But part of it too is, and this is why when people say you need to be right, why it actually bothers me. If it was just no, I want you to know that you're wrong, I wouldn't be bothered. But part of what bothers me about that is there's actually a part of me that wants to know if I am wrong. I'm just not going to make it easy. Mm-hmm. I have my beliefs for a reason, but if I had no interest in realigning my beliefs, I wouldn't engage in those discussions at all. It's not that enjoyable for me. The only reason I do it is because I'm like, hey, maybe this person is going to be able to say something to me that makes me be like, oh wait, no, I'm fucked up. It's happened with Perry multiple times. It happened the other night. We got into it, and sometimes when we get into it, it gets a little bit petty. But there have been multiple times where I've been like, oh, no, wait, shit, I get it now. And that is really my ultimate goal.
Right. Right. Well, I think part of this too, the dynamic stems from like the IQ of the person you're talking to, right? Because like, it's been said that people that have a difference in their IQ of like 15 points or something like become uncomfortable speaking together. I can't quote the study that said that. I've just heard it from armchair psychologists on YouTube and stuff. Actually, I think even Jordan Peterson might have mentioned that in one of his talks. Like it becomes hard for people to continue a conversation or to interact long term if their IQ is off by more than 15 points, right?
I can definitely see that. Absolutely.
Right. So like there are certain people that enjoy that type of discussion with someone who is like a intelligence peer, right? And it's because they don't get that prolonged kind of interaction with people of the same IQ level that often, and so they enjoy in that kind of debate. But that's not everyone, right? I think that's some people. I think other people, it definitely stems from insecurity, and like maybe not wanting like the statement you mentioned where it's like you just want to be right, and you're like, well, no, I already believe that I'm right. I think there are people that it's not that they want to be right, it's that they want to be perceived as right and intelligent.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I
No,
want people
absolutely.
to perceive me
Yep.
as intelligent and correct on the issues that I've thought about, to prove that I've put thought into them. You see that a lot in the libertarian community. Um, you go into any chat that involves a group of libertarians, and it is nothing but over explanation and tons of like points on research that have been discussed, and well, this is why I think this way, and kind of just like asserting your knowledge on a specific subject. And honestly, like at a certain point, for me it becomes nauseating, and I'm just
Yeah.
like, okay, I don't care. Like, you don't need to prove to everybody you're the smartest person in the room. And I've said this to a friend. It's funny, for a long time I had this desire to seem like the smartest person in the room, and then I realized at one point it's actually much more valuable to not be perceived as the smartest person in the room. um
Yeah,
you
I definitely agree with that conclusion. Yeah, like you get a lot more social utility out of that. And again, like I've been accused of that, like wanting to be the smartest person in the room. But again, the reason that bothered, like I have heard since I was very, very young how smart I am. It means nothing to me anymore. In fact, if I were to ask someone that I cared about, like, what's your favorite thing about me? And they're like, oh, you're so smart. It actually pisses me off because I'm like, can you say fucking something else? Like, I'm so tired of that. And that's not me bragging. That's just another reason where when somebody says, oh, you just need to sound smart to be the smartest person in the room. I'm like, I'm sick of that. I'm so sick of it. And I think that honestly, a lot of times it comes from, like, I'm glad that having this discussion, you've been like, no, I've wanted to be that person, because again, I think a lot of times that accusation is projection. Like I have felt this way before. Thus, this person over explaining must also be doing it because of this. And in that case, my idea that people are using overly verbose language could also be a projection of mine. So that's fair enough. But that's...
well, it's interesting you said
I guess
that.
we can't ever know.
One thing that is interesting is that, like, you say, I don't want my entire personality I'm reducing or deducing what you said, but I don't want my entire personality to be about my intelligence, right? Like, is that
Right.
fair to say?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
But at the same time, the reason that those like projections get put on you is because you are placing yourself in a position where someone might assume that that is what you're trying to do because it is what you are displaying to the people in the interaction.
Right.
Right.
I mean, if it's my nature, I can't help but display it.
Well, I mean, yes and no, right? Like there's
And
like
I don't mean if it's my nature to want to seem into if my nature is legitimately being intelligent, I
Mhm.
can't stop doing that. I mean, I could stop behaving in a way that made it clear that I was intelligent,
Well, and that I
which
guess I
again relates to what I was saying about being like, yeah, there is some utility to not seeming like the smartest person in the room, regardless of whether you are or not.
mhm. Well, that's I guess kind of what I mean, and I'm not saying like it does sound like you enjoy doing this, right? Like you enjoy these intellectual discussions and like
Yeah,
even
I
if
enjoy the discussions for themselves. I don't enjoy like peacocking. I
right,
enjoy the act of the discussion.
right. But
It
you don't like dislike the negative association with intelligence so much that you'll forego those kinds of discussions to avoid it. Right? Is that fair to say? Like it
Oh
sounds like
yeah, well I mean it's like I'm not like well to me that would be like I'm not insecure about being intelligent.
right.
So
Right, but I guess what I mean is like if you like it sounds like the fact that like association is kind of assigned to you as a core of your personality, it more annoys you. It does you don't loathe it. Like you don't hate the people do that to the point that you would want to change. You just find it um obnoxious because you think there is other aspects of your personality that you would much rather people notice and associate with you. Is that
yeah,
fair to
yeah, I
say?
mean it's kind of like a woman, a woman with big tits doesn't just want to be known for her big tits.
Right. No, and that's
It's the
exactly what
exact
that's
concept.
that's exactly what I was thinking where you're like, "Well, I'm not bragging. It just is the way it is." You can imagine a girl being like, "Well, people are just so attracted to me. It gets so annoying that they're constantly attracted to me." And you can see how like those are you could associate those as being like similar, right? Like it depends on like if she actually does have that problem or not. Like if a woman isn't that attractive and she says that, it's like it's kind of um what's the word I'm looking for? Like I mean it's annoying, but like there's a better word for it.
Yeah,
Whereas
well,
like
no, I mean, and that's a good point. Is it's like, but are you just a pair of big tits? And like, well, are you just a brainiac? Like,
yeah. Um but no, I just yeah, it's interesting. Like this is something that me and or you and I really diverge on, right? I've talked to you about this before, but I'll bring it up for the sake of the podcast. Um growing up, I was like told that I wasn't intelligent. Um, I like my dad called me stupid a lot, things like that, right?
oh Jesus, yeah, no, I
Um,
can't imagine.
and it it took me going to college and getting through calculus 1 and 2 to yeah. It's funny. I was a math minor in college, and I don't really use it at all, but and I found it really challenging. But the biggest thing I got out of it wasn't that I learned calculus, it was that I learned that I could pass calculus. And that was the most
Mm,
valuable thing I got in college was I became disillusioned to this idea that people that hold degrees and are in positions of intellectual authority aren't necessarily smarter than you.
mm-hmm.
I had professors that I like at a certain point I realized I'm like, "Oh, you're not here because you have a super high IQ. You're here because you pushed it out and grinded to get your PhD long enough to actually obtain it, and now you're in this position, but like you're like slightly above average at best." Um,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, um And
Which, kudos to them for their discipline. But yeah, discipline is great and it's something I lack, but it doesn't necessarily mean you're the best person for the position.
right. And there were times when I was in the Navy, right, like near the end of my career, that I had several people just tell me in casual conversation, um, they're like, "Wow, you actually are really intelligent." Or
Mm-hmm.
like, I even had a chief tell me, he's like, "You're too smart for your own good," which I don't think meant that I was super intelligent. I think it just meant, I think what he meant was like, the fact that you question everything is not going to work well for you in the Navy.
Yeah.
Uh,
100% true. Had the same problem. Yes.
yeah, but like, it wasn't anything I ever believed, and I also realized that they were telling me that they were, those people in those moments, whether it was um a conscious decision or not, they were telling me that because that's what I wanted to hear from them. And and it was, and it did come from a place of insecurity, but it drove this desire for people to acknowledge my intelligence. Um, it wasn't until I had like actually come to terms with the fact that I'm like, okay, I'm pretty intelligent. I'm definitely not the smartest guy I know. Um, but like, if I really had wanted to, I could have become an engineer or a scientist or what have you, right? Like,
Mm.
I realized, I was like, okay, I have fairly decent intelligence and I can put this insecurity to rest, right? And it changed the way I interacted with people. And like, I'm not saying that I like act dumb around people I perceive as dumb or anything like that. It's just that like, I realized that like, I don't need to have other people know the things, like the positions I hold on things as much as I used to. Um,
Mm-hmm,
my
mm-hmm.
those types of like long-winded debates with people, they kind of died away just because like, I mean, it seems, I would assume I don't enjoy them as much as you, but I definitely enjoyed them for a long time. But like, there came a point where I just didn't enjoy them anymore, and I was like, oh, okay, like, this is just becoming frustrating, so I'm just going to end the conversation, or do what I was talking about earlier, where it's like, I'm just going to let this person speak, so I'm just going to like engage them by asking more questions and like not providing a ton of input, rather just like feedback enough that they can like enjoy themselves talking. You know what I mean? So like, we're
Yeah.
we're we're
No,
on.
I get it. I'm enjoying those sorts of conversations a lot less than I used to, but it's from the opposite angle. Like the way I always approach things is I need you to question your beliefs and I need you to make me question mine. And I'm starting to get sick of that because I'm realizing that people don't want to question their own beliefs and they definitely don't give a shit about making me question mine. They just, again, they want to be right. And that's why they tell me, hey, you must just want to be right. But for me, the intent has always been like, let's make each other question our shit. Let's actively do that. Make each other question our beliefs. And that is just not a thing most people are interested in at all. They want to
Right.
believe what they want to believe. And they could give a shit. No, it's not that they could give a shit about my beliefs. It's that they want me to believe what they believe also.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, there's definitely like ways to do that don't engage in debate, right? So like, part of it is the debate itself. It's not just the, I want you to challenge my beliefs. More so, it's like, like, tell me where I'm losing you, because I'm just trying to understand you here. It almost seems like it's like, I want to challenge your beliefs, because if you can defend them coherently, I will have a different respect for you.
Not even a different respect for you as a person. That was actually good. I've never heard anyone with a different natural mentality than mine explain my mentality in a way that was so close. But that was pretty damn close. It's not a matter of respecting them as a person, because for the most part they're fucking strangers. I don't give a shit. But it's the belief itself. If somebody can explain a belief in a way that's coherent, then I can respect the belief.
Mm, mm-hmm. Okay. Right.
Even if I don't agree with it, although that's really rare, because I've actually said this before many times. I don't care most of the time what people believe. I care about how they defend it.
Right. Well, see, it's also 'cause, like, I'm just thinking about like other ways that like I've done this and tried to reach certain points, right? Like where it's like, okay, well now I respect your position. One way that I did that was I had roommates that had like really extremist beliefs that weren't entirely aligned with mine, and
Oh, the Teutonic Bible people.
yeah,
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 yeah.
they were
God, I
like,
wish I could have talked to them.
yeah, national socialists who were like super pagan and like, yeah, just like pretty extreme even for me. And I was roommates with them, so I was forced to interact with them for a while. And I thought like, okay, well, how am I going to make this work? Because like I don't want to just argue with the people I live with all the time if it gets brought up with which them being so opinionated, it got brought up all the time.
Yeah.
So what I did was I was like, okay, I'm going to steelman your argument for you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this interaction wanting you to be right and wanting you to convince me you're right. So like totally open mind, like lay it on me, give me your best shot. Like let's say I want to believe what you believe, like sell it to me. And I actually ended up getting a lot out of it because what ended up happening was I had a much stronger understanding of why they felt the way they did. Like beyond the reasons that I was like, okay, this is interesting. It was more like there's more to this than just your rationality, right? Like libertarian ideology is very much based in like reason and logic, right?
Uh-huh.
If you talk to any libertarian who like has done their research, they will quote philosophers and like they will like break it
Data
down
and
very
yep.
very logically.
Yep.
Whereas with like these other extremists of this large political spectrum, there's also people that like it doesn't all come from a place of reason and logic. Some of it is
It's
emotional.
pure passion. Yep, it's
Right.
just pure passion.
And it's like, yeah, so show me your passion. Like what drives you so much? And it really opened up this new understanding for me. Um
No,
and
that's a good point actually. I will try to incorporate that in the future because that's yeah, I mean and if I'm going to sit here and claim that the point of my conversations is to well half be like, well, I think that you're wrong, but the other half being like, well, tell me if I'm wrong. For the latter half, that is how I should approach it, is to be like, okay, no, genuinely, I want you to prove to me that I'm wrong. So I'm not even going to say anything. Just tell me why I'm wrong.
right. Well, and that's
Give
the
it to me.
thing. You're trying to get them to rationalize a position to you that they did not arrive at through ration necessarily, right? It could have been a mixture of rationale, but part of it is like how they feel about it. And it's like your your beliefs in the world are a lot like a painting, right? More so than a document, in that it still conveys information to you, it tells a story, but there are certain aesthetics about it that appeal to you more so than another painting. Um, and so I think that is an important part of knowing half the story, right? And going back to the quote too, I think that's what's really interesting about the way I love how he uses two different quotes in this quote, because you don't just see his rationale, but he basically convinces you to do a little thought experiment in your head, and you realize when you read the first quote, the social utility of the indeterminate sentence, blah 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 blah. When you read that, and then you read the next quote, I wish Jones to go to jail and Brown to say when Jones shall come out. By the time you've done both of those, you realize you're like, oh wow, I actually did put more thought into the second quote trying to understand it than I did the first one. And
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
and it like
Well, no,
actually,
and I think like considering all this, what puts people who are driven by passion at a disadvantage is that putting feelings into words is difficult because words conveying something linguistically inherently requires some degree of reason. And I think that their subconscious awareness of that might be why they try to convey things in such a complex way, is because essentially, since it's so hard to put a feeling into actual words, what they're doing is being like, well, it's going to make my feelings more credible if I make this super complex.
Mm-hmm.
It's me being charitable anyways. Like I am trying to
Well, I get what you're saying. It's almost like
not consider them inauthentic. I'm trying to consider why they might do that in a way that's like, I really do, have a firm belief in this thing and want to convey it to you in a way, but it's so hard. So I'm just going to do it in a way that seems super intelligent and like I know what I'm talking, or like I know what I'm saying exactly what I mean, even though I'm not sure I'm saying exactly what I mean.
Well, what's interesting though is that I'm talking about how trying to understand it from their perspective. You could think about it as like you're trying to learn it from their level, right? Like whatever level that is. It could be that they are doing that because they are trying to convey it to you at the level they perceive you best to convey it at. Does that make sense?
I mean, that would make sense if they had any awareness of who I was as a person, I guess.
Right, but that's the thing.
But if they just come right out and like, hey, I have an idea about something, and immediately they launch into this overly complex dialogue, it's like, well, are you assuming I'm smart?
Well,
you don't know anything about me. That's why I assume, you're trying to sound smart.
What makes this difficult is because it sounds like the majority of these interactions you have online. And I think it's a lot more beneficial to talk about it in terms of conversations you've had with people, because you can infer so much more even leading up to the initial conversation, right? But not only that, but like natural conversations don't start typically with an assertion of a point of an abstract theory or thought, right? Like you've never been at a party and someone goes, I think the working class should have this because X, Y, and Z reason. You know what I mean? And then then you just go, why would you say that?
But
well,
I have.
But
it's rare. But
I was gonna say, and I imagine it's also around people that they know. You know what I mean?
Yes, that is
they
definitely.
They say it probably because they know the people that they're talking to, and they're either going to get a positive response or they want.
Yes,
to
I was the
in
stranger in that group. Yes.
Aha, yeah, exactly. So they might have thought they were in safe company for that instance, and then you challenge that assertion. But that's my point. If you are willing to challenge someone's assertion, even in that scenario, they're going to make some assumptions about you, right? Even if it's your first couple back and forths, it's like a joust almost. It's like I'm not trying to attack you yet. I'm feeling it out, right? I'm just kind of probing to see how good you are at this, how much effort I need to put into it. But then eventually,
yeah, or it's just somebody conveying a point. But I think as it relates to the quote, I don't think the quote that we derived this whole conversation from applies in any other circumstance than someone doing something via writing or doing something in the forum where people are literally going there to have some sort of scholarly debate. There are no circumstances in which what that guy was addressing, saying something in a complex way, would occur other than via writing, which in modern times, online, or via, hey, we're going to go all meet and debate each other. You know what I mean? Because in the context of just an average conversation, people are just talking. Nobody's going there okay, I need to set this up and say, I don't have the quote before me, but say that complex things that he said. They would just say, well, I think Jones should go to jail and Brown should determine how long.
Okay, well, and that's, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to drive at though is that like um there is a possibility that, you know, there the person involved in this is trying to convey things at a level that one they are comfortable with, but two at the level they feel the other person is going to best perceive them, right? Like there are instances for sure where someone is using language that goes over the heads of the people they're talking about, and like a good example of that is the whole snake oil salesman analogy. um and that can
Right.
certainly be obnoxious, but like
Well, if it's a function of them trying to say it in a way that they think the other person is best set to receive, the reason that doesn't make sense to me is because anyone that could perceive complex language would inherently be able to also understand simple language.
right,
So
but
why would they assume like there's no way this person is going to understand this unless I sound like a fucking Poindexter?
right, but I guess what I'm saying is like earlier when you had mentioned that, um, or maybe it's what I mentioned about part of it is if you can convey your position in a way that I respect the position because of how well thought out it was, then like that is kind of part of what I'm after in this engagement, right? Then it,
Okay, no, and yeah, okay.
so
That
it, and it, so what I'm
I
saying
get what
is,
you're saying,
yeah,
but like
it could be that, hold on just a second, it could be that these people are trying to say it in a way that will gain your approval, right?
right,
Because
no, and that is literally what I think.
yeah,
But
but
what
no,
they're missing is that the complexity of language isn't what's going to gain my approval.
mhm.
It's the meaning behind the words that they choose. And also their own understanding of the words that they choose.
Yeah, but
If they're being like, well, I'm gonna gain his approval. Oh no, I get what you're saying.
yeah,
Hold on. Yep. They think that the only way they're going to get respect is by sounding intelligent.
because they're talking to someone who's intelligent and they want that
Yeah.
person to not disregard their opinion because it sounds unintelligent.
Yep. I get it. Yep. Okay.
Good night, folks. No, I'm kidding.
No, but I mean, this is exactly how those conversations with Perry I was talking about go, where I'm like, yeah. Eventually, I get it, and that's my whole point. Like, convince
Yeah.
me I'm wrong.
Right.
Well, you just convinced me. Well, not that I was wrong necessarily, but you just added a new perspective, and I understand now. Yes,
right.
they see someone they perceive as intelligent, and they're like, the only way he's going to respect my opinion is if I also seem intelligent. So it's not a function of necessarily them being insecure about their intelligence, although I think to a degree sometimes that still applies. But maybe also they're doing it because it's like, I want him to get my side, and the only way he's going to do it is if I seem intelligent.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, and that's what's so interesting
Yes.
about it, because like
Okay.
on one side you have someone who may not be seeing the whole picture because they are failing to look at the other aspects of it outside of the um the reasoning, rationale side of it, the use of intelligence. Maybe there does need to be some emotion mixed in and some passion in order for the full picture to be seen. But on the other side of it, you also have someone who, instead of trying to convey that necessarily, is trying to convey it in the most effective way for the person they're talking to, who only wants to see it in the rational, explained best verbally kind of way, right? Like, it's fascinating to talk to someone who's really passionate about their beliefs, even if that person is not the most eloquent with their words. Like if you've
Yes,
ever,
and that's exactly it. And that's again why I think I chalk it up to insecurity, because throughout this conversation I've thought about, there was this video I just watched of some old Appalachian man who was getting interviewed and was like very just limited with his words. Like somebody would ask a question and he would sit and think and it would be like 5-6 words. And I'm like, God damn, this, like, I really want to hear this man, even though he speaks in a way that is very, very foreign to what I'm saying. Like, he clearly just believes what he believes and is willing to explain. I would love if those people that I have been referencing do that too. And I get why, upon hearing me speak, they would feel the need to not do that. But it's I guess it's one of those yin yang things again, where it's just people hear a verbose person and they're like, I must be verbose to explain my opinions, even if it means saying things I'm not sure I know exactly what they mean. But the intelligent person may just want to be like, no, I actually want to hear your passion. I actually just want to hear your passion.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like almost like like to a really intelligent person could potentially like forego demonstrating their intelligence in order to simply hear the other person out, right? And from that they might gain a lot more. And part of that is being receptive to aspects that you otherwise like might disregard. Like, and I'm not saying this is your case, but there are a lot of people who look at ration and reason as like the only way to look at something, and they'll scoff at someone who brings up how they feel about a certain subject over what they know about it. And I think that they're doing themselves a disservice when they do that, because you can learn a lot more about someone when you can reach the point of empathy where you're like, oh, I really understand how you feel about this. Not just, okay, I get the gist of how you feel. Like, I understand that it makes you feel this way. It's like, no, actually put yourself in those shoes and go, I enjoy this, right? But with enough of a degree of separation that like you're not like sucked into something that you actually don't want to believe, right? Like I have always loved having dangerous conversations with people. And when I say dangerous, I mean like talking to someone about a sensitive, like a culturally sensitive topic, um, in order to like hear the emotion behind why they feel the way they feel, right?
Mm-hmm.
A couple years ago, I got to have a long conversation with a Jewish man who had lived in Israel, and talking to him about the Palestine situation. This was years ago, not with what's going on now, and talking about like the history of Israel and stuff. Like, that is a sensitive subject, and if you bring that up to certain people, they can get like really charged up. But I liked talking about that because I was, because like you start to like really see like what are the deep emotions like behind this.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know. I mean, like I think like the type of people that you're engaging with, I think they maybe don't feel like explaining their emotions behind it is going to appeal to you in their audience. Um, and so they default to, well, I'm going to, beat this guy at the game that he plays at best. But I don't even like the way I phrase that, because it creates it as an opponent rather than someone who's just trying to be heard, you know?
Well, right. And realistically, if they were trying to beat me at the game that I play best, it would be more than just complex language.
Well,
It would
imagine
be,
it this way.
point A leads to point B leads to point C, because it's funny that you phrase it that way, because I've felt the opposite, where I'm like, well, I'm going to be you at your game, so I'm going to be shaming and insulting, because that's what you do.
Well, and see, but I think that's a reduction of your perception of them. It's like, okay, well, this person, this is what they do. This is a bad tactic, so I'm going to use their bad tactics against them, rather than coming at it from a place of empathy, where you might be like, I'm going to try and think about this from a more emotional perspective. Um, like, the way I'd like to put it is, like, if you have a person who only knows one language and you have someone who's bilingual, but the language that you share in common is not their first language, the conversation is going to be a lot more difficult for them, and you're also not going to understand it as well as if you spoke their native language.
Yeah, no, I mean, I that's kind of how I've done it too, is because I'm like, look, I've tried communicating things to people in a way that's just like, look, I'm trying to be as neutral as possible here and just state the nature of the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And your response to the nature of the thing is to accuse me of being evil.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my mind, the only way I can communicate to you my beliefs is to make you feel evil for your beliefs, because clearly evil and good is the only language that you understand.
Right, but see, that almost sounds like a projection to me. And here's what I mean by that. Not a projection of how you feel, but how it's a projection of how they're making or they're attempting to make you feel. Do you get what I'm saying? Like it's
I don't
almost like,
see how the word projection applies, but I
well,
mean,
what I
like
mean, well,
if somebody accuses one of a negative trait, it's, I mean, it's clear at that point that that's their intent. If somebody says you're a bad thing,
mm-hmm.
there's no other interpretation than they want to make that person feel like a bad thing.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is if you were to take that and then go, instead of turning it around and going, well, I'm going to make you feel that way, so we're on the same page about this. Um,
Uh-huh.
going asking them, or even just asking yourself in that moment, it's like, why are they trying to make me feel bad? Like, what about the subject that they're talking about makes them feel like that is warranted, or even like a position that's worth declaring, right? Like, what
Okay,
is
no, and that's fair. And I've never done that. I've never been like, why are you? I've never actually been like, why are you trying to make me feel like a bad person?
right? Like, whatever they believe, they're trying to place some kind of guilt on you for not believing it. So it's like, well, what is
Yeah.
so important about this that you feel that that's necessary here?
Well, and actually, the better question to me is like, what is so important about this that you can't even grasp the idea that somebody may feel differently and not be a bad person? Maybe they have an actually good intent behind their beliefs.
Right. So, my fiance's sister, um, is pretty prone to arguments with her siblings because they do have these very drastic beliefs on things. But it's very interesting because I'm enough removed that there's a polite barrier where it's like, well, we're not going
Mm.
to engage in an argument, so we'll just engage in a discussion. But also, like, I tend to play the mediator between the three of them whenever it
Yeah,
does
you
turn
can
into an
you can
argument.
sit there with your arms crossed, and they're like, "Okay, we're not going to get too crazy because we have an
Well,
outside guest."
well, that's part of it, but also part of it is that, like, I will interject and go, well, hold on, here's where I think you're right, and there are times where I'll interject to be like, well, think about it this way, and like an interesting, like an example, right, is
It reminds me of Telegram conversations. And it hasn't happened in a while, but somebody's like, "Well, you always agree with it." I'm like, "No, I agree with who I think is right."
right. Um, um, she has. We were watching a safari video, and I was talking about going to hunt Cape buffalo in Africa with her brother, just because I think it'd be a neat activity to do someday. And she brought up the sister. She brought up. She's like, I just don't understand how people can enjoy doing that. And
Does she
also,
eat meat?
she does, but
Okay, that's weird, but okay.
then also, like, really, and her point was, she's like, we got to the point where she's like, I understand why you would hunt for food. She's like, but these people are hunting for trophies. And then what pissed her off the most was, she's like, when they kill the animal, they cheer about it and they like take pictures with it, like, and jump up and down. And they're like, why would anyone be happy about having to take the life of something? And
Okay, I mean, I get it, but it's like, I mean, God.
Okay, hold on. Hold it right there, because
Yep.
that I think is the important point. You said I get it, right? Like you're like, yeah, I get it. Like, okay. But like, have you ever tried to make yourself think, like, what does it feel like to feel like that? Like, to have this very, like, even if you explain it to her, right? Even if you explain to her, like, safari hunting is actually good for conservation. It promotes the growth of these animals on these
Yeah, and I've done
reservations.
that.
Right, and
Yep.
you can
Yep.
explain it
I've
all
done
to
all
her.
that. Yep.
None of that matters, right? At the end of the day, she's like, I don't care. I just I hate that people exist. I basically, the way I'm putting words in her mouth, so that's why I'm not quoting her directly, like, and using her name. But basically, what she was saying, she was like, I hate that there's people that exists that can cheer and be happy about taking the life of something.
Okay, so clearly, like you referenced earlier, like I get it. I do get it. Here's the way that I would explain that exact thing to her,
Mm-hmm.
because uh Perry, friend in England, he's a vegetarian, and I've talked to him about a couple years ago. I went and hunted a deer, had a big giant discussion with him about it because I actually care about his opinion of my morality, and like everything was kosher. Here's my thing with it. I'm like, okay, she eats meat, which he doesn't even do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that involves an animal dying. This is the way I would explain it to her. You eat meat that involves an animal dying. Yes. So the reason I would go and do something like that and cheer it is because there's a challenge involved. I'm not simply going and getting meat from an animal that somebody else raised on a farm and butchered. I had to expend effort to go and do this thing. I had to be able to aim right. I had to be able to find the animal. I had to be able to make sure. And again, this is my own thing. I don't want to wound an animal and have to chase it down forever, not out of laziness, but because I don't want that animal to suffer. I just want to be able to kill the animal quickly because I do respect it. I have a degree of respect for this living thing. The reason I would cheer it is because of the challenge. And then I would go and use every part of that animal that I possibly could. And again, another reason I understand what she's saying is because a guy who would go and kill a Cape buffalo and just take the head and leave the carcass out to rot, okay, that's food for the lions and shit. But for me, that's actually fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to kill something, I'm going to use it. And if I keep the head, okay, like I'm not using all of it. I am just trophying it. But that's a testament to the effort that I put into it. But I would at least try and use as much of the rest of it as I could. So the balance for me is I'm not going to go fucking just kill something to kill it and display that I killed it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to use most of it at least.
Mm-hmm.
So I would agree with her that it is fucked up to just go kill something and just to have a part of it to mount.
Mm-hmm. So, like, I think that's a really good position, right? And like, if you were to explain that to me, and I would be like, yeah, okay, I can see where your morality lies, and I can see that you're not a bad person for doing what you did, because you explained why you did it, and you explained it in a way that demonstrates your morals, and they're indeed not negative. Like, you're not a sociopath. Like, that's obvious. The problem, I think, lies in the fact that, like, in her instance, it's the part of the problem isn't rational. The part of the problem that exists for her is that she cannot do the thing that I've been espousing that we do, which is she can't, in her brain, she cannot imagine what it feels like to be the person cheering after they just took down a giant buffalo. Like, that is so far gone and different from her existence that she's incapable of thinking and putting herself in those shoes and actually being like, oh, I see why this could excite you, and I can see why you would want to express your joy doing this. Like, she's incapable of doing that necessarily. So you explaining it to her, using your reasoning and your rationale for why morally you find it justifiable in most instances is not going to bear any fruit, I think. Like, I don't think there's enough that you could say to the person in that situation where they're going to go, oh, I get it. Like, there's just not, because it's simply a matter of them having the capacity to go, okay, I'm in Africa. I've been working hard for this. I shoot this animal. I'm overflowing with joy. I want to demonstrate that. Like, that is so foreign to her that she won't be able to comprehend it. Right?
No, I think you're 100% right. And I guess in the end, there really is no need for me to justify it.
Right. Well, that's
and that
the thing.
comes back to what we were saying earlier. Is it's like at a certain point you can just be like, well, okay, agree to disagree or whatever. But
I'm pretty sure what ended up happening in that conversation is, as it got more heated, I just stopped and I said, "What's your favorite dinosaur?" or something along those lines.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Just fucking deflect from it.
Yeah.
No, and I mean, I get that thing too, but it's like, I don't know. In the end, it doesn't matter because clearly she's not like telling her sister like, "Oh, you needed to fucking get away from this guy because he's hunting Cape buffalo or whatever." Like,
right? It was literally
she has a feeling about it, but yeah, exactly, or purely emotional, but not purely intellectual enough to the point where it's like, you need to agree with me, or I can't tolerate you having my extended family, or her being like, you need to agree with me, or I can't tolerate having you in my extended family. But right. It is an interesting exercise to me to be like, can I make this? Not make this, but can I get this person to agree with me? That's what I enjoy about it with. Can I get this person to agree with me? Can I get this person to at least question their beliefs? Because, I mean, of all the people I know, and again, I don't think this is me. It's not that I don't think this. This isn't me intending to suck my own dick. It's me wishing that I had more peers in this particular regard. But like earlier when I was blabbing, it was like, oh no, I get it. I have experienced so little of that from other people I've tried to talk to. I just wish that I had more peers in that regard. Because again, to me, it's not about a need to be right. It's not about stubbornness. It's about not understanding. It's about only understanding something in the way that I understand it, but wanting to understand it in a different way. Mm-hmm. And it might take a while. It took us I think like an hour and 3 minutes before I was like, oh no, I get what you're saying. Mm-hmm. I wish there were more people who actually wanted to be like, oh, I get what you're saying. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the part where you said part of it is I want them to see what I'm saying. I want them to maybe question their own belief based on my argument, right? Like, do you think that stems from, where do you think that stems from? I should ask it in an open-ended statement. Where do you think that stems from? Because you kind of just explained it, but like if you could like reduce it down and simplify it, like if you could say it as simply as possible, where do you think that comes from?
Me wanting to question my own beliefs constantly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's as simply as I can. I mean, that is a perpetual state of my being. Again, I would not engage in these conversations at all.
Where does that
if
stem
I didn't
from?
want to,
not to just go down a rabbit hole, but like, where does that stem from? Where do you think that stems from? Wanting your beliefs questioned on a intellectually rigorous level. Where do you think that comes from?
Okay. That's the irony, because I've thought about this before. Mm-hmm. So the accusation that I've addressed multiple times, where people are like, you just want to be right. Mm-hmm. They're actually correct. But the
Mm.
way that they say it and the context that they say it in,
Mm-hmm.
what appears to be their meaning is that, like, you just want people to tell you that you are right.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is that I actually want to know the ultimate truth.
Mm-hmm.
So they're right. I don't think that what they're saying, I don't think that the explicit literal meaning of the words that they are saying is their intent. I think when people say you just want to be right, what they mean is you want me to tell you that you're right, because that is false. That is not the case.
Right.
But I literally want to be right. I literally want to only believe things that are true.
What do you do when you get there?
I'd probably kill myself.
So it
Because I
almost
would feel no more need to, like, I would just be like, well, like, that's it.
right. Well, okay. I mean, like, so what, what good does that do you? Like, what it like that? I guess, like,
Well,
have you?
this goes back to the yin and yang thing.
Mhm.
What good does that do me? It makes me feel good. It
Makes me
makes
feel
me
good.
feel good to that I know the truth.
Right.
It's
So
emotional. It's purely emotional.
right. Would you say that it's almost? Would you say that it's impulsive? Like, and I don't mean impulsive like lack of self-control. What I mean by impulsive is like not maybe that's not the right word. Is it something you feel compelled to?
Yeah, no, I mean, like, I don't necessarily believe in the idea of an unconditioned consciousness, but that would come closest to that thing.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I don't feel it's unconditioned is because I think I could explain what about my youth makes me feel that way, at least
Mm-hmm.
partially.
Yeah.
But it's the closest thing to I can't help it at all. I cannot help the fact at all that, like, I only want to believe and know. Well, no is already indicative. I only want to believe things that are fundamentally true. Like, that is a very, very core aspect of my entire being.
Do you ever find yourself in a discussion with someone where you realize they're not going to tell you the thing that's going to help solidify your truth, but you continue to engage with them anyway?
Not Not really. Not until they tell me, like, I don't care about this anymore. Like, I'm done. At that point, I'm like, okay, well, you know,
Right,
clearly
but
they don't care about this as much as I do. But up
right,
until that point, I'm like, no, I can explain this a different way. I can explain this a different way, which that literally goes back to the exact beginning of this conversation where it's like, dude, if all you can do is repeat the same line but not be able to explain it, like, you're of no use to me.
right,
Because
but think about it yeah.
it's been a positive thing in my life too, where I've had like, my girlfriend now has, there have been times, and my ex, I mean, fucking everybody I've interacted with really at some point has gotten to the point where they're like, I'm sorry, I don't understand. And I'm like, that actually, like, bothers me a little bit. I'm like, why the fuck are you sorry about that? No, that's my fault. I need to explain this in a different way until you understand. That is on entirely on me.
Like, I'm trying to think about it in like other terms because that's how I try to explain things differently, right? And like if I think about your interactions in because the majority of it's debate, right? Like in this in like based on this quote, like we're talking about when you debate someone's ideas, right? If I think about it in terms of like judo or something, right? Like just pick a martial art. It's like you if you become so good at judo that the vast majority of people that you go up against, you win easily, and they don't put up a challenge that makes it rigorous enough, do you continue to engage with them?
Well, it's not about winning for me.
No, and I'm not saying it is, but don't think about it as in like just simple terms of winning and losing. Think about it in like the winner of the judo match is the person that like challenged your beliefs enough that you could potentially lose. You are not trying to pin them down and win that way. You just want the competition to be so rigorous that you're like, I've met a worthy opponent. Like this person is a good judo partner. Like
Well,
this is
I mean,
someone I should spar
that's what
with.
would make it fun, but I would also be satisfied with like, oh, I get what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, like I have said that to people throughout my life, and it takes a long time. I mean, like I said earlier in this conversation, it happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's happened with Perry. That does take a long time for me to do that. But
Mm-hmm.
like that oh God, I can't think of a time in my life where that's ever happened the other way around, where somebody's been like, "Oh, I get what you're saying. Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense."
Mm-hmm.
Like that
Well,
never fucking happens to me. And if that happened, that like end of the judo match, I have no need to continue.
interesting. Um, well, I mean, because it almost sounds like the people that you end up having these discussions with are the people that are more interested in sparring than learning.
I think I, I know. I think most of the people I have these discussions with are people who want to be right. The people who accuse me of the thing that they assume must be my intent, and
What?
the only reason they would assume it must be my intent is because it's their intent.
Well, what I mean is that like if somebody wants to be right, then they just wouldn't engage with you, right? They're like, well, I don't need to hear this. I already know that I'm right. Like they've already
Oh,
determined
okay.
that they're right.
Well, no, that's what I said about myself earlier. Okay, so let me rephrase actually. I think that most of the people that I engage in this dynamic with want to be told that they're right.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be told that I'm right. I would be content with, I get your perspective.
Yeah, that. Well, I mean, I feel like that part confuses me because like I understand that like online people don't do that, but like I say that to people all the time, right? Like I'm like, okay, I get where you're coming from. I just disagree with it for X, Y, and Z reasons, right?
Yeah,
Like,
nobody's ever told me that though.
huh, that surprises me. Um, that's just so surprising because like I just feel like I interact with that kind of dialogue more often than you. Like
I
to me,
well, I
to
mean,
me, it's
we've
just
had our beefs before, but you've never said that to me.
I get what you're saying. I say
I
that
think
in almost every
I
debate I have is like, no, I get what you're saying, but, and I'll do that. I get what you're saying. Like I've heard you and I've acknowledged it, but X, Y,
I
and Z.
I
Like
think that I think that people that I get into conflict with
also,
about
wait a minute, that's
things to
not
that
necessarily
degree,
true because
I
I can
think
think
they
of one.
assume I think they assume that the other person, or I think that they assume, yeah, that the other person just inherently knows that they quote get what they're saying.
I can think of one instance specifically where you definitely changed my mind on something, and we've talked about it. It was the subject of like torture, which we don't need to go into explaining why we were talking about torture on a philosophical level because that'll take up a whole nother podcast. But
I
like
was gonna say that would be a good one though. That would be a really good one
we should at some point.
because my perspective has changed a little bit on that.
Yeah, well, I used to be diametrically opposed to you on it, and there was a point where I
Yes.
came and said, you know what, I actually thought about it some more, and I put myself in that position, and literally what I've been espousing that people do is what caused me to change my opinion about it with you. I said
Mm,
I put myself in that position, and I tried to think really hard of what it would be like if I was in that position, and it made me understand where you're coming from. And like
mm-hmm.
that was one
Yep.
of those that was one of
That
those
is key.
yeah, and that was one of those rare instances where I was like, oh, in this instance, I really think Nick had more empathy than me because he was able to put himself in those shoes where I wasn't until I put in a lot more effort, you know? Um, and it like, but like to my point though, is that like, like you've definitely heard it with me because that instance happened. I get that you may not hear it very often, but like you definitely have heard it before. But my point is, and I need to stop skirting around it, and I'll just ask you directly. Like really, what I'm trying to ask is like where is the point of satisfaction on a given topic if it's not about winning an intellectual sparring match? Because if it's not about winning, or if it's not about like I just want to engage in this debate because I find it enjoyable, and it's just about knowing the truth, then like you're not going to hear anyone with the authority necessary for you to go, it is the truth, because they acknowledged it. The truth is only going to come from you resting in your confidence in the answer that you've arrived at. So at what point does it become sufficient where you're like, I don't feel the need to debate this anymore because I have already decided that I am right, because of what's happened before and where I've gotten to.
It's hard to quantify, I guess. I mean, it's at the point that again happened earlier in this conversation where I was talking and I was like, oh no, I get it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I can't exactly quantify every element of what led up to that point. All I can say is clearly it's possible within the context of the conversation. And and like to the point you just brought up about torture, from what I recall, that didn't happen in the context of the conversation, which is what I'm talking about. Like one day you just like, we were talking one day randomly. I think you were just like, oh, by the way, I also get you, which mad respect. I totally get that, because there are points like that for me too, where I'll have a long conversation and not in the context of the conversation itself come back and be like, oh, hey, by the way, like I've had some time to basically meditate on this.
Mm-hmm.
I get your point now. So
right,
that's fine too. I just mean in the context of a conversation, there have been many more times where I've been like blah 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 blah. Oh, I get it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that I don't think has ever happened to me. Well, okay, not never. I think Perry has done it once or twice, maybe, where he's like, oh, I get what you're saying, like. That's what it comes down to. Oh, I get what you're saying. And not just, oh, I understand your feelings of this matter. Because that's different.
Mm-hmm.
And then for me, I guess that's what I need to do a lot of the times. Or that's what I do. But when somebody in the context of a conversation is like, I literally understand what the words coming out of your mouth mean. Mm-hmm. That's what I'm seeking.
So part of it sounds like it's like you want to be heard, right? Like, but like not in like,
I want to be understood.
There we go. I want to be understood. That's a better way to put it, right? I like just saying I want to be heard, because when I say it like that, I mean like, I don't mean it in the sense that like I just want someone to listen to me talk. I mean in like I want someone to actually acknowledge what I've said, right? And
it's not again, for me, it's not even, because I've actually always hated both of those phrases. I want to be heard and I want to be understood. There's a chick with the same MBTI personality type as me who always used to say, I want to be understood. And I'm like, I don't fucking get that. And I was all pissed off. That I think was like an insecurity of mine. It's like, no, that is actually what I want. I want to be understood. Because being heard is like, I hear politicians all the time say like, oh, I hear you. Well, yeah, you have ears. Like you clearly hear. Mm-hmm. But being understood is something different entirely.
Right.
I want you to comprehend the actual denotation and connotation of the words coming out of my mouth.
Well, and that's just the thing, and that's how this kind of ties up, is that like it sounds like the people that you're having discussions with want to be understood more so than they're willing to let up enough to understand you, right? You want to be understood, they want to be understood. You reach an impasse because you both want to be understood and the other side doesn't want to validate that. Even though, I mean, it does sound like you are to a degree, but it also sounds like you challenging their beliefs in an attempt to be understood makes them feel like they're not understood.
Yeah, no, that actually sums it up well.
You know, and
I think that they might assume that, like, well, this guy doesn't want to understand me, but that's the opposite of the case. I would
right.
love to understand them, but they have to explain it in a way that's not just giving me words that, like, are rehearsed.
hmm I would almost challenge you,
It's
man, that like in these kind of interactions, if you believe that the person even somewhat can come off earnestly, then when you pursue it, rather than going into your approach that you typically use, like try and open up a more personal dialogue with them first, and like allow yourself to be a little bit vulnerable with them so that they can see. Because like I understand you enough that like now that like we rarely get into arguments anymore. We used to, but like we rarely do now, because I understand that your objections to things I might say are a process of you attempting to understand what I'm saying, as well as like fortify your beliefs, right? I understand that it's coming from a place of earnestness, but like if these people don't that you're interacting with don't understand that it's coming from a place of earnestness, then they have no reason to tell you that they understand you, because they may just not care, one, to even acknowledge that they understand you, like it doesn't matter to them, or two, they may just think that you're not being sincere because they haven't taken the time to know that you're being earnest, you know. And like
Yeah,
that
I mean, I guess that's a potential. I don't know. I get the. Uh, I know there are people that do exist who have a need to, who have a desire to want people to think that they're good people,
hmm
whether or not that's true. And I've never had that desire. And I think that's the main, like a very big beef I have with the people I often disagree with, is I'm like, why do you give a shit about whether or not people think you're a good person? Why not just be one? And then people will know. Like if you're a good person, everyone is gonna know one. Why do you have this strong desire to make everyone think you're a good person?
hmm
That's never been a concern of mine.
yeah,
I don't need people to think that
right, but
at all.
well, yeah, but
And I think that there are bad people who want people to think they're a good person because that enables them to continue being bad.
hmm well, okay, so the people you've grouped a lot of people into a certain category, right? Like there are people that you're talking about, people you interact with that virtue signal, like overtly so, who you assume aren't being genuine. And it sounds like you're in
Yeah,
these
because
instances you're
their behaviors don't match up with their espoused ideals.
yes.
They're opposing
Okay.
almost. Well, not opposing, but they're not living in the way that they tell everyone you have to live this way or you're a bad person, which is different than being like, oh, you should work out, it will make you healthier.
hmm
I mean, okay, a fat person can say that and I won't judge them because their statement is true. And I'm not going to be like, oh, you're only saying that because you want. No, maybe you realize that. You also just acknowledge that you lack the discipline. Fine.
hmm
But there are people who are like, but people need to help the disadvantaged or else they're bad. Well,
hmm
are you helping the disadvantaged? Or are you demanding that other people do it?
Right. Okay. So part of this is not only and you mentioned this earlier, but I want to come back to it because you're talking about it specifically right now. Is part of this isn't just for you to know the truth. Part of it is you want to um, try and correct another person's negative behavior or maybe their lack of awareness. Is that a fair statement?
Sort of. It comes back to what we were talking about before the recording with like, I'll take a bad person who says like I'm bad over a bad person who says people ought to do good things.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
I mean, well, yeah, but
it's I'm not trying to correct their behavior. Like if somebody's like, I'm a piece of shit, I don't give a shit about anyone but myself, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want. I'll be like, well, okay. Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't do that. But somebody who's like, oh, everyone else is a piece of shit. Everyone else should be going out and helping people. Everyone else should do this and this and this. But I'm not doing this at all. Like that to me is like the worst thing somebody could possibly be other than like a straight up violent psychopath.
Okay, so what is the motive for interacting with those people? Like, are you trying to learn? Are you hoping to figure out why they are that way? Or, like, yeah, what's the motive behind that? Because that is a different group of people than, your conversations with Perry or somebody else.
Okay, the motive behind that, ironically, is that I just despise inauthenticity.
Right. So you're
like as much as I despise dishonesty, because that like again, that's another core aspect of my being. I hate dishonesty, and I think inauthenticity is essentially dishonesty of character.
So, do you think that those interactions, like, I mean, this is hard to say without it sounding accusatory. I'm not trying to.
That's okay. No, just don't worry about it. Just say it.
Okay. Do you think that these interactions with these people are healthy?
No.
Okay. There we are. That's good. I feel like we cracked into something because I think that's important, right? Like, so
it clearly doesn't solve anything because it never has. So
no, it doesn't have to solve anything, but it's the awareness of it, right? Because like that's kind of what I was talking about earlier with choosing to engage or not. It's like at a certain point, it's like, is this a form of mutual masturbation where it's like two people that hate each other are just going to argue with each other for the sake of arguing, No,
I mean it's not at the point it gets to something like that, it is not. I stop enjoying it. It's about it's not about the enjoyment of the conversation. It becomes a function of like, again, it's the horseshoe theory yin yang thing where it's like, now I'm beyond rationality. I'm at the point where it's like, how can you be like this? How can you cast all of these aspersions on people despite being exactly what it is you claim to hate? You're just pretending. I hate the pretending thing.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. It's like,
and I guess that's the difference. Is I'm more than willing to acknowledge that. I am willing to acknowledge when something is purely just emotional or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And that's good, and that's really good, obviously. But like, I guess, like, I think about it in terms of like, because social media, one thing that people say is that like the reason we're more diametrically opposed in society now more than ever are these echo chambers that we're in and where people are reinforcing our ideas. I don't think that's true. And it's funny that we're
me
talking
neither
about
because there are very few people who think the way that I do.
Well, yeah, but like more so, like I was just watching this YouTube video that like was talking about this, and I was like, oh my God, this is so true. It has less to do with the people in your in group. It has more to do with the fact that there are so many people from your out group that you encounter on the internet. It's not the confirmation bias that is making us aggressive.
100% true.
It is the amount of disagreement that exists. Because if you take any tribe, there's going to be some opposition, but it's always going to be in the minority. And it's always going to be like a few dissidents that like can typically be silenced purely out of like group disapproval. But the internet,
well, and even beyond that, their dissidence is like minor. It's not some, you have a isolated tribe of 100 people in the woods. The dissidents are going to be people who are like, oh, I disagree on a few of these points, not somebody who's just out of nowhere completely diametrically opposed to every single thing that the tribe believes.
Right, and not only
that. And now we're able to encounter people who are like, holy fuck, like, you exist in my own supposed nation, and you don't believe almost anything I believe.
Well, exactly, and that's the point that I'm driving at, is that you, like what you just said, you exist in my own nation. It's interesting because when you think about it, like if you had someone in your tribe that disagreed with you on something, you would probably debate it. But at the end of the day, you would be like, well, we both have to be respectful because we both live in the same village and we have to get along because we have to work as a team. So like we're going to put the differences we have aside to be more constructive. But these people that you engage with, they're not necessarily in the same tribe, even though they're in the same nation. So it's interesting how you interact with them, because the way you interact with them, continuing to engage with them and continuing to try and sometimes shame them, sometimes understand them, almost implies that you do see them as being in your tribe. Because if they were outside of your tribe, you wouldn't even be interacting with them. You wouldn't give them the courtesy to interact on that level that you are. If they were a true outsider, you would engage in overt aggression against them.
Well,
if we lived 100,000 years ago.
No, I mean, there are people in my quote nation, like quote nation, not actual nation, who I would engage in overt aggression against if it weren't for these people whose livelihood depended on essentially ignoring their own beliefs and just doing whatever they were ordered to by the rulers of said nation. Who would stop me even if they agreed with me because they were told to and their paycheck depended on it. Cops,
right,
military, whatever. Yeah. Like I don't engage in those behaviors with people I disagree with that diametrically in my nation because I consider them part of my nation. I leave it at disagreement because using physical force would put me in danger. That's the only reason. I would gladly eliminate, let's say, some people who disagreed with me on certain things diametrically if I could do so and be safe from people who were neutral not because of their own beliefs but because their livelihood depended on neutrality. But the point you brought up does raise a good point where it's like, when I say nation, it's definitely in quotes. And I brought this up the other day. Someone's asked a question, something like, what do you think the solution to the problems in the West are? And I'm like, we need to fucking balkanize. Like, we need to live amongst people who actually believe what we believe. Have some degree of separation. That would resolve everything.
It would. I mean, it would solve some things. It would definitely. I don't think it'd solve everything, but I get what you're saying. Like, it would solve a lot of the.
It would solve the important things. Like, maybe there would be some conflict from border to border, but because of the influence, I think, of like Western liberal democracy and Christianity and stuff like that, I think it would be like, oh, you guys are doing stupid shit. Well, we think you're doing stupid shit. Well, we're not going to go to war over it. And like, that would be it. There would be no need to have conversation beyond that. There would be no violence because people would have this like, well, no, we're content in our own areas here. We think you're pieces of shit. I mean, it's like countries now. It's like a whole bunch of the world is like, Iran, you're a piece of shit. Well, there are no troops in fucking Iran right now blowing up all Iranis. There's proxy wars and shit going on and stuff like that, which I guess that could be a problem. But in the end, like just looking at the United States in particular, since it's all Western, I think if we balkanized, it would pretty much just be like, you're fucked up. Okay, well, you're fucked up. Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to go to my job now, fuck my wife, and raise my kids. And that's that.
So in a way, when you're having these debates with the people you're diametrically opposed to, would you just say that, like, you are engaging in a type of verbal combat? Like, at that point, like, you were just trying to make them feel bad because they are the outsider and you see them as not belonging? Like, I'm talking about the people that you had mentioned that you'd be willing to commit violence to if there were no, like, overt repercussions from an outside entity. But with those people, like, because you can't do that and you choose to argue, is the argument just a form of verbal combat at that point?
It's not just that, because of the way that things work and because I am sort of roped into a quote nation with them. It's also a function of like them actually having some degree of influence of how I'm able to live my life.
Well, okay, I have to disagree to that point because, like, the influence that they have is minuscule to the point where it almost doesn't matter, right? Because, like, unless you're having an argument with your city council member, like, the average person that you're engaging with, the most they have is a vote, and a megaphone via social media.
Well, no, it's not just a vote. I mean, like, if everyone agreed with me, let's say if everyone around me agreed, if everyone in the United States agreed with me, except for the politicians currently dictating the rules to the fucking retards in blue uniforms that will obey orders even if they're contrary to their own morals, that would stop.
Right, but like
you're not going to be able to combat that.
You're not going to get that by having one-on-one conversations.
Oh, yeah, people. No, absolutely. And I bring that up to people all the time, too. Like, to a degree, again, some of it is just me filling time. I don't think it's actually going to accomplish anything.
Right, and at that point, I think it's mutual masturbation, right? Because it's like they're getting the same thing out of it you are.
No, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wonder if that's healthy because, like, I used to do it.
No,
too.
And I already said it's not.
Yeah, and you didn't. No. What I mean is like taking it a step further is like, is that something that you want to work on, or is that something that you want to try and like disengage from, or like is this something that you're like, I just like doing it, I'm going to keep doing it?
Oh no, I would like something to care about to the degree that didn't matter anymore. And I already have an idea of what that is.
Yeah.
I desperately want to raise a family because at that point, I won't care anymore. I really will not care anymore. It won't matter at all.
Right. No, that makes sense. I mean, it almost sounded like if you weren't going to raise a family, the path that you ought to take is one of trying to influence people, but on a larger scale.
Yep. Nope. 100%. Yeah. If I got to the point where it was like, you know what, it's going to be impossible for me to raise my own family, I would probably enter politics. As disgusting as that makes me feel right now, I have 100% acknowledged that that's the way.
Well, it doesn't even have to be politics. I mean, you can influence people by writing books, making movies, writing music, like, being in a podcast. You know what I mean? Like,
it's same thing, but yeah, that's what I meant, really. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't necessarily mean becoming a politician, but
I see what you're saying. You're just talking about entering the political arena.
Yeah, or the socio-ideological arena. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Interesting. We certainly deviated from the quote tonight. But
we always do.
We always do. And I mean, it was a super interesting conversation. This is our longest podcast to date by far.
Yeah. By 100%, actually.
Quick with the maths. Cool, man. I mean, is there any final thoughts like that you had involving the quote, just for people to think about?
Yeah, tie it back in. Yeah, it's again, it just comes it for me. It comes down to authenticity and actually just thinking about the meaning of what you're saying, and not just saying things because someone you agree with who seems intelligent has said those words. Like, actually think about what the words you're saying mean.
Hmm.
That's the big thing.
Cool. I like it, man. All right, I will catch you next time.
Rah.